Good evening and Happy New Year. Welcome back. I hope everyone had a wonderful summer, and I look forward to hearing everyone's tales of what you did this summer. And I know there's some nice relaxation time with family and friends, but here we are at the beginning of the 2016-2017 school year. The Halton District School Board would like to acknowledge and thank the First Peoples of this territory and other Indigenous people for sharing this land in order for us to continue our work today. So welcome to the Wednesday, September 7th, 2016 public board meeting of the Halton District School Board. I would like to mention that you'll notice some changes first to the different font and typeface and setup of our board agenda, if you've had a chance to look at it. The immediate changes you'll notice are the different font and typeface and a different setup. It's formatted this way to be compliant with the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, or AODA, standards which are set for our new website. And if you haven't had a chance to check out our new website, please do. It is very exciting, and thank you to everyone who had a hand in making it such a great place to go and look around. So as you know, the board website underwent this major revision this summer, and as a result, this was required to be compliant with the AODA standards. That means all documents posted to the website for public consumption must be compliant, so therefore the new look. So we don't have the days of the serif font, and that's the typeface with the feet such as the Times New Roman, or the different point sizes within a document, or charts and graphics. So everything has been simplified. They're more text-based rather than graphs and charts. And everything will be in Arial, a sans serif font in 12-point type. And there are more compliance features that are invisible and things that are happening behind the scenes, including a new Adobe version for the file management, different formatting and tagging, and several different accessibility checks in the process of developing and saving files, and much more. So the staff is working their way through the existing documents and admin procedures and other different files that are on the old website to make sure that they're all compliant. So this public board agenda session is the first visible sign that is out to the public and for trustees with this new compliant look. So just a little bit of background. So now that I've welcomed everyone and we've called to order, I would like to note regrets from our two new student trustees, and everyone else is here. So could I have a motion to approve the agenda? Trustee Gerbent, seconded by Trustee L. Harrison. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Trustee Reynolds. Thank you. That passes unanimously. Are there any declarations of possible conflict of interest tonight? Seeing none, we have no delegations or presentations tonight. So we will now move on to the minutes of our regular and special board meeting, or regular board meeting of June the 15th, 2016. Do I have a mover? Trustee Reynolds, seconded by Trustee Pappen. Is there any discussion on the minutes of June 15th? Trustee L. Harrison. Whoop, no. Trustee Oliver.
Thank you, through you, Chair. In the comments that I made in the trustee questions and comments section of the agenda on June 15th, I would like to provide a little bit more detail for the comment that I made, and I had submitted the revision to Ms. Gordmaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee L. Harrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick comment with respect to the wording around the recorded votes. Just to say that I believe it should read, since the vote was not unanimous, as opposed to since consensus was not reached, as voting is consistent with Robert's Rules of Order. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions regarding the minutes? Seeing none? All those in favor? And that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. So, was there any business transacted in private session tonight?
None that to be reported.
None? Thank you. Not tonight. So we will now move to the order paper. Are there any comments or questions regarding the order paper tonight? Seeing none, we will then move on to our action items. And I do have a question. There are no action items listed here. But on our June 15th meeting, we actually did have the Code of Ethics policy feedback brought back to us. It could be moved to the action items for tonight because it would be the second meeting. I don't know how trustees feel about that. Trustee Harvey Hope.
I don't think there's a massive rush on that one, so perhaps we could wait. But I'm going to suggest that 4.2.3 never mind. It doesn't need to move up. It's where it's supposed to be. Never mind.
Thank you. So I'm seeing that we'll just leave it for next meeting in 2 weeks, or yes, no, maybe? Well, then we'll leave it where it is, but we get to it, we could waive the rules if we want to pass it. We'll just leave it there for the moment. So there are no action items for tonight. There is no student trustee reports. We'll welcome at our next meeting. And so our action items for September the 21st, 2016. The first item is the Code of Ethics Policy Feedback. Director Miller, Report 16115 on page 15 of your board package. Director Miller.
Thank you, Chair Amos. The report's before you, the Code of Ethics Policy feedback. We had no comments, and it was out there for more than 25 days. So,
thank you. Are there any comments or questions on this motion? Motion. Seeing none, then it will come back in 2 weeks. The next item is the Board Bylaw Committees. Trustee Collard, Report 16116 on page 17 of your board package. Trustee Collard.
Yes, thank you. The report is before you. It summarizes the changes as agreed upon. The only one change that needs to be made is that the 3 sections immediately following standing committees, which are called subcommittees, decision-making, and meeting format, should actually be subsections of standing committees. They're not standalone sections. And I've already arranged with Manager Gortmaker to ensure that they are appropriately indented for the next package. The only other item is that I'm the chair of that committee, not the co-chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions or comments on this report? Trustee Harvey Hope.
Thank you. First off, I just wanted to thank Trustee Collard for all her work on this because it's very easy to read. Even after a long summer of being away from it, it's like, oh, familiar. Yeah, that's a good thing. So apart from the subcommittee decision-making meeting format being indented, I wondered whether or not the topic name was actually committees, because the first part is standing committees, and then farther on it goes and talks about other committees. So I believe the actual, when it comes back, the topic name should be committees, and then we have different kinds. I'm also wondering whether number 10 under decision-making, it seems to be talking about the committee of the whole, of which there are various standing committees inside them. So I was having a bit of a problem figuring that out, but I think a solution might be to put meeting format before the decision-making. Because once you get into the discussion inside meeting format about what the standing committees are and how they run, then the discussion about how you make decisions makes more sense. So I'm wondering whether, if it doesn't make that much difference, the subcommittee, like the meeting format and the decision-making, I think maybe it would help if, and then renumbered, so. And then in number 13, I had a question about, it said, consensus model of decision making shall be utilized. But I was wondering what happens, does that mean there are no votes? Or what if no consensus? Would we default to, if there wasn't a consensus, would we take a vote? It's kind of silent, so I didn't know if that needed fleshing out. I mean, it's fine the way it is, it just leaves a few questions in my head, so that might be a parking lot item. Number 15, it may be topics which fall within private session parameters versus under, but that's just grammatical. That looks really good, and like I said, it was easy to read, and I could actually recognize what we were doing in it, which is number one priority when you are trying to put something into a bylaw, that it actually does reflect what we actually are doing at the moment. Thank you.
Just in response, yes, I can see how meeting format could go before decision-making, so we could flip those. And yes, it should be topic committees, not standing committees. So yes, I agree with both of those changes.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers to this? Seeing none, then it'll come back in 2 weeks with those with some revisions. So we're now up to our information items for September the 7th. The first item is 4.2.3, the Director Summer Authority. Director Miller, Report 16114 on page 24 of your board package. Director Miller.
Thank you, Chair Amos. The only item that we had to look at summer authority was the movement of some principals of promotion of vice principal into principal position.
Are there any comments or questions for the director on this? Seeing none, then we'll move right on to our administrative procedure update. Director Miller, Report 16117 on page 25 of your board package. Director Miller.
Thank you, Chair Amos. On the first one, employee personnel files, it's a minor revision. It's around a criminal background check. I would look to Executive Officer McFadden if you have any questions around that. And the second one is around the school boundary review. And there were a couple of changes in that school boundary review, and I will speak first, and then I will turn it over to Superintendent Etoff if he has any comments. But there were two changes, primarily two changes. The first was that super councils, and I know many of the trustees around the table have super councils will not make up part of the boundary review committee. They will be, of course, invited to boundary review committee meetings, as is the public. The reason for that change is because school councils are legislated, super councils are not legislated, and if there's not a super council in an area, we may have an inequity around the board, around where that be, or in some cases, the super councils the area may be small, but the super council itself may be large, and there may be lots of comments. So the second one is we've taken the principals of the affected schools out of the boundary review process. This is to try to ensure that the principals maintain a neutral perspective on this and just provide information for communities and avoid any kind of perception of a position on it one way or the other. I don't know, Superintendent Etoff, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you've pretty much covered it.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions on this report tonight? Trustee Al Harrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is just with respect to, I guess it kind of goes back to one of the last items in Trustee Harvey Hope's comments around consensus model of decision making. And I note that this has, I think it's been the previous practice as well, and it's noted in here again, a consensus model of decision making. And just given the potential for divergent opinions on these kinds of committees, I was just wondering whether how that's worked in the past in general, and if it's ever not worked, and how that goes.
Through your chair, Amos, to Trustee Al Harrison. By and large, and I say by and large, it has worked well. I know in some areas of our board it has worked extremely well. In Milton, it has worked extremely well, is my understanding. In Oakville, it has worked maybe not extremely well, but well. I've been involved in several boundary reviews in Oakville, and there has been, shall we say, minority reports or minority opinions around a consensus, but essentially we have reached consensus report, or a report that the bulk of the people that were on the Boundary Review Committee were prepared to live with. And the same, I think, would be true of Burlington. I'm looking at Superintendent Etoff if he has any comments, but the consensus model, I would say, has been successful. It has worked. We have not had fires in the shed as a result of using the consensus model, let's put it that way. And I'll let Superintendent Etoff add a couple comments.
Yeah, I would, through the chair, I would concur with that as well in my experience in Burlington. While we've had, the process is set up to ensure that all views are able to be expressed, all ideas are considered. As a result, I can reflect upon one particular boundary review where we started with 10 different scenarios and ended up with 37 or 38 different scenarios because everybody's thoughts and input were considered. Obviously, at the end of the day, you need to arrive at your best, couple that you want to refer on to the director for consideration at that point in time. Usually, you have most, if not all, individuals on side and behind those recommendations that have come forward.
Thank you. That's excellent. I fully support a consensus model of decision making. Do you feel, I wonder if there's a need to define what it means, because I know there is a tendency that when the going gets rough, we revert back to voting. And I think that is an expectation sometimes in communities. And I just wonder whether this would be strengthened by our definition of what consensus means.
Through your chair, Amos, to Trustee Al Harrison. We actually do, in the actual boundary review process, when the committees get together, we spend some time at the front end because it's discussing what we mean by consensus. It's my experience and it's my understanding that we have never reverted to voting at a boundary review process. Sorry?
It's true to this.
Yeah. So there is a considerable time spent in the boundary review process explaining the process, the consensus, the steering committee, and ultimately, of course, who makes the final decision is the Board of Trustees. So there's a lot of that done at the front end. Where the challenges come in, and it sometimes comes in for the Boundary Review Committee members, when they are representing a school, they are then asked, which way did you vote? What did you do? And they have a challenge sometimes. We try to support them best we can by giving them the information and doing that. But there is a fair bit of front-end education around what we're doing. So I don't know if it would help to have it actually in the procedure, but I don't know. I'm looking at Superintendent Etoff again.
Yeah, it's definitely part of our process. And often when you first get the group together, the first thing they want to do is get their ideas out on the table. And I know it's sometimes a little bit of a frustration for them, but we force them through a very deliberate process so that it's the same in every different area that we do it in. and we follow our procedure, and part of that is exactly what Director Miller stated, is talking about how we make decisions as a group, how we're acting on behalf of all individuals within that particular boundary area, and that needs to be at the core of our ultimate decision making.
No, go ahead.
I'd just like to add a comment. I've been involved in several of them, so has Superintendent Etoff, and many of the trustees around the table have been involved in many of them. And I would like to acknowledge and applaud those parents that volunteer to be there. I mean, some of them come in with agendas, some of them come in with pretty fixed ideas, but by the end, I think they may not agree, but they understand the other side a lot better. And I think it's a process that works pretty well. Even for those that disagree, I've never heard personally, and I don't think any of the supers or the SOs around the table, or trustees around the table, have heard people complain about the process. They've concerned themselves maybe around communication, or they concerned themselves around the decision. But those that participate in boundary review, I think we pretty well did. And there's Senior Manager Renzella back there who's at them all. I think I really do acknowledge the work of the community and the parents that step up and join those committees. They really educate themselves and try to understand all perspectives.
And I'd like to add the consensus definition is the one that was established for the Parent Involvement Committee, and I can't find it right now on the website, but I know it is part of their mandate, and that's the one that was carried forward to use in the boundary reviews when we first set it up, and it's probably on the website. It's just I'm not sure where yet because I'm still learning it. So, Trustee Harvey Hope.
Thank you. Just on this topic first, the last boundary review committee that I was involved in definitely worked on the consensus method, and because the committee's decision, vote, recommendation is not binding, it works a lot better than having a recorded vote of any kind. I mean, it really is, can you live with this? If you can't, I'm trying to paraphrase Superintendent Hunt-Gibbons here, but if you can't live with it, what would make it so you can live with it? Is it wording? Is it this? Is it that? So it definitely works like that, and I think it's been a definite improvement over another process I was involved in where it was a vote of 54. So I definitely would say it's been a massive improvement. My question or suggestion was actually going to be, thank you very much, Director Miller, for the explanation of what's different in this admin procedure versus what is not there, and could we get those explanations into the report? So that, if you're going to say, by the way, yes, there's moderate changes, and by the way, it's mostly A and B, could we just kind of write it down when you actually, in the cover? Because I write it down now, but if I happen to have not noticed that while reading it, sometimes it's like, oh, yeah, okay, I know that. And I did recognize the principles being out of the process, so that one I recognize without it being highlighted. But for continuity.
Through your Chair Amos to Trustee Harvey Hope, that's an excellent suggestion, and in fact, it's one you've made before, and I apologize because we didn't do it this time. So we will indeed make sure that we do that in the future.
Thank you. Vice Chair Graves.
Thank you. I have first a question and then also some comments. My question is about the Boundary Review Steering Committee, the fourth bullet down on that first paragraph on page. There's no number on that page. On there, it looks to be page 26, perhaps. It says trustees for all the affected areas, including trustee who will co-chair the Boundary Review Committee. So what's not clear for me on that is whether or not the trustee who will co-chair the Boundary Review Committee is the trustee who is in the area that's affected, or who is not a trustee for the area affected.
Through you, Chair Amos, to Vice Chair Draves, it is someone from, it is the trustee from outside the area, so I think we need to, yeah. Yeah.
Right, so that'd be great if that could be clarified.
Superintendent Etoff? Yeah.
Okay, good. And the other one of the other comments I had too is also around language. So I like when it says the superintendent of the affected area and so on. But later on it says the affected school superintendent or the affected trustee, and to me that's not clear about what's the definition of an affected trustee. So if those could be flipped, I think that would be more clear as well. And so my final comment is just on I really liked having everyone, when we've done boundary reviews in Milton, I've really liked that the entire community is involved. A representative from each school has the opportunity to be on it. I do like that. I understand that trustees do not approve this report. So I think my suggestion in implementing this, I would like to see that net cast as widely as possible in the application of this as it pertains to boundary reviews, particularly in Milton. And my thinking on that is, because I have 30 seconds left, is that even though a school might fall slightly outside the area that's affected, they might not be affected by this particular boundary review, but if a school that is close to them is at overcapacity, then it's going to affect them on the next one. So and also I feel that that parents of students who are not necessarily affected by the boundary review bring a nice objective perspective to that committee. Thank you.
Through you, Chair Amos, to Vice Chair Draves, thank you for those comments. Yeah, I think we have to take good care in determining the affected areas, because sometimes, and we've seen it happen, a school was not included and probably should have been. So I think we take your comments.
Thank you. Trustee Daniele.
Thank you. I'd like to echo my colleague from Milton's comments and concerns. It seems really funny because we are one of the ones that uses the full super council process for the boundary reviews, and we've got some of the most successful boundary reviews going. So it seems kind of funny that we're taking what's really successful and throwing it out. So that is a struggle for me, but I did hear you say that every school council would be invited to attend the meetings. They may not be part of the committee, but they will be invited to attend there and to hear all the information. And if we happen to have a super council meeting the next night to discuss what they saw the night before, then that would be perfectly okay, wouldn't it? I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have something that's working really, really well in Milton, and it's just, I understand the logic that you are using. You have to have consistency, but I guess I'm frustrated that we're going consistency, bringing it down to the lower level than being at the working level. So we're probably going to find a way around in Milton to try and keep doing what we're doing in terms of our community consultation. I'll give you a heads up about that, but I do understand why you have to have the consistency across the board.
Through you, Chair Amos, to Trustee Daniele, thanks for that. I agree. Super Council model worked very, very well in Milton. And I appreciate the fact that you understand that we need to be consistent and so on. But as you've alluded to, these are public meetings, and if Super Council would like to attend and then discuss it at the Super Council meeting, that's entirely within their purview. So they just won't be part of the Boundary Review Committee. So.
I didn't want you to think we were being underhanded when you saw it happen.
No.
Thank you. Trustee Collard.
Thank you. I've been a part of boundary reviews before and after the changes to the process, and I have to say that the changes that were made a few years ago to make the process more transparent were very much welcomed by the community. I've also been a part of some rather contentious boundary reviews, and even though people may not have been happy with the result, there was never a complaint about the model, and they did a very good job. The superintendents did a very good job of explaining consensus and the decision-making model. And I almost think that when you take it out of print and present it, it's more impactful than just having it on a piece of paper. So I don't object to it being added to the admin procedure, but I think that there's more impact to having it presented and repeatedly presented.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers tonight on this? Seeing none, then we'll move on to our next information update, 4.2.5, the board report update. Director Miller, you're up again. Report 16116 on page 33 of your board package.
Thank
Director Miller.
Thank you, Chair Amos. There are 3 changes. One I'm going to talk at length about, and I've asked Senior Manager Renzella to be here because he may have something. The first change is, and I'll explain why some of these changes. I will not be at the next board meeting on September 21st, and some of these things I think the director needs to be in the room, so that's one of the reasons for the changes. The first change is the admin procedure regarding critical dates, which is what we discussed last spring about aligning the spec ed plan and budget and all those things and having a better alignment along that. Executive Officer McFadden and Associate Director Bogue have been heading up a committee, and you'll have that report for October 5th. It was originally coming September 21st, and they'll bring that. And you'll see some greater alignment there that makes us a little more cohesive and a little more sense for everybody around this table, because I appreciate that last year in particular, you were being asked to vote on one thing when you didn't have the information about another thing and you needed both. So we heard you, and we're hoping that this will resolve that. The second one is around, and I'm saving one to the end there. October 19th, special education class placement and admin procedure around that has been moved to October 19th. As Superintendent Zonnefeld went into this work, as you can appreciate, it became a lot more complex a lot quicker than anybody had anticipated. And so we want to make sure we've got it right. And so we figure better delay it by a week or a couple of weeks than to bring in a report that's incomplete or insufficient. The third one is, and it's not really in any particular order, and I'm going to talk a little bit at length about this, and that is an ARC announcement report. We originally had scheduled that there would be an ARC announcement report coming to the board September 21st from the director on secondary schools in Burlington. That's been delayed until October 5th, primarily because the director will not be here September 21st, and I'm sure that there will be a lot of questions. The report will determine whether we will be undertaking an ARC of Burlington secondary schools. It's confined to Burlington secondary schools. It's not elementary schools. It's nowhere else. So we would bring the report then. But there's a couple of things that I want to point out, because I certainly appreciate, and I think everyone in this room, particularly the Burlington trustees, appreciate that this will be a hot topic for some time. Whether we recommend to do one or whether we recommend not to do one. But whatever the recommendation is before the board, it is going to garner all sorts of conversation. And there are things that there are guidelines and policies that we have to follow from the Ministry of Education. And one of those that we have to follow is if we bring a report recommending an ARC for high schools, secondary schools in Burlington, we would provide several scenarios, just as we do for boundary reviews and so on. But there's an element of it that could cause some confusion in the community and some ill feelings prior to a final report coming to a board if we are undertaking the ARC. And that is, in the report, we must bring a recommended option on what we are considering. So I'm obviously not going to mention any kind of high schools or anything like that now. But if the report is suggesting an ARC, there will also be a recommendation on possible school closures. That, I emphasize, is not the final. That's the beginning. The purpose that the ministry has set out around that is to set up a starting point for the ARC committee to discuss. I know we'll have to be careful about that because when that goes out there, the community will assume the fix is in and that this is what's, some will think that the fix is in, some will assume that the decision's already been made. I want to emphasize, and I will emphasize over and over again, there's no fix. There's nothing in. This is the starting point, and we are complying. And I will read exactly from our procedure, which says there must be a recommended option if more than one option is presented. And from the Ministry of Education Pupil Accommodation Review Guideline, March 2015, it says, initial staff report. Prior to establishing a pupil accommodation review, the initial staff report to the Board of Trustees must contain one or more options to address the accommodation issues. Each option must have a supporting rationale. There must be a recommended option if more than one option is presented. The initial staff report must also include information on actions taken by the school board staff prior to establishing a pupil accommodation review process and supporting rationales to any actions taken or not taken. So the reason I elaborated a little bit on this is because I know that the community we have been talking about this for some years, and the community has been talking about it for some years or some time. I want to make sure that we're as transparent and obvious as possible. The report will be coming October 5th. I obviously can't talk about the contents of that report yet because they're not before the trustees, but there will be a report at that time, and some of the things I've said tonight, if there is a recommendation of do an ARC, will be repeated on that evening. So I leave it at that unless Senior Manager Ranzella has anything to add. I'll leave it at that and open it up for any kind of questions around that. And I would also add that one of the reasons we've done this is because we know that these are very emotive issues for communities, particularly around secondary schools. So, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any comments or questions for the director or Mr. Ranzella on this report tonight? We have a couple. Trustee Collard.
Thank you. My first question is for Superintendent Zonnefeld regarding the special education class placement admin procedure. I'm wondering if you will be consulting with SEAC on that procedure prior to bringing it to board, or if you will be presenting it to SEAC after presenting it to board. And I do have another question after.
Thank you. Through the chair to Trustee Collard. That report in the next draft, I've already brought it once to Admin Council, is coming tomorrow. So if I have, in its current version, if I have the support of Admin Council, I would bring it for the next step of sharing it with SEAC next week.
Thank you. And my second question regarding the program and accommodation review, thank you for clarifying the process and that you have to bring a recommendation. If we were to vote in favor of proceeding with a PAR, is part of what we vote for based on your recommendation, or are we just voting to proceed with a PAR? Because I can understand it will create that much more confusion in the community if we actually have to vote on a recommendation to get a PAR going, rather than just voting on getting a PAR going. I really don't want the community to be thinking that a vote is a final thing on this.
I will start, and then I'll ask Senior Manager Ranzella to elaborate. Through you, Chair Amos, to Trustee Collard, you've identified exactly the dilemma. Well, it isn't really a dilemma. Trustees will be voting on the initiation. If you're voting for a PAR, you'll be voting on a PAR. And the purpose of that recommended option is a starting point for the committee to work with. There would also be other scenarios that the committee would look at. But I think the challenge for us will be in the communication areas, and the challenge for trustees is when you vote for it the way it is, it may look as though that's what you're voting for. But I can assure you that's not, that recommended option is not what you would be voting for. You would be voting for the initiation of a PAR. Dom, do you have anything you want to add?
Through Madam Chair, to Trustee Collard. Yes, that's the intention, is that it more or less is a starting point. I think it's how we would word the recommendation, just to ensure that, you know, that the PAR be initiated, and that as part of the presentation of options, this recommended option be presented to the Program and Accommodation Review Committee for further review and discussion and so forth. We'll still have to kind of wordsmith that. But yeah, I understand where you're coming from. Is this it's more or less trying to start the process and move it forward. I think, again, the ministry's intention is to start the discussion, and they felt that a lot of times, and again, in some cases, some boards, they just gave carte blanche to some of these communities, and there was no way to start the process, and they were just spinning their wheels. At least this kind of gets things moving.
Thank you very much. I am very grateful that the wording will be gone over very carefully.
Thank you. Trustee Harvey-Hope.
Just a question. The community planning and partnerships that's listed as September 7th isn't on the agenda today. I seem to recall it's been a couple months. We may have done it in June, or is that to be pushed further into the year? Number 2 on the list.
Through the chair, I believe that the report is listed if there are any schools that want to bring forward any special events, and at this point we have not received any, so there would be no report.
Proposals. Trustee Grevant.
Through you, Chair Amos. Now, this is more of a clarification for trustees for answering questions, since we're talking about people accommodation reviews and the potential of having one. This is more to put out there. If we were to start a PAR, when would this PAR actually take effect? Like, when would these students actually be adjusted in their schools? Like, what's the minimum sort of date that we're looking at? Just, is it next September? I personally would think it wouldn't be, but the public, I'm sure, wants to know.
Mr. Enzel?
Well, we have a certain time frame in terms of undertaking the PAR, and given October, and by the time the decision is made, it's probably the second meeting in October. And then setting up the committees and so forth. Like, we are lucky to have a decision, you know, maybe May, June of next year is the time frame. It would be very onerous on our part, or draconian, to implement it for September. And I think there's other issues in terms of teaching unions and agreements and whatnot. So any implementation of a school closure would likely take effect for September or the end of June 2018, or 2018, the end of the school year, so that any changes would take effect for September 2018.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee L. Harrison.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. With respect to the report, I was just wondering whether the First Nations, Métis, Inuit report and the Learning Center's reports should be included on that list. My understanding is the FNMI is an annual report, and the Learning Center's report is one that was requested as a result of the budget discussions last year. And I think I don't see them on the list.
Through you, Chair Amos, to Trustee Al Harrison. You know you didn't see him, not I think I didn't see him. You're just too nice to us. I'm looking at Superintendent Etoff. You're right. They should be somewhere, and we'll get that updated for the next board meeting. FNMI and the Learning Centers report.
Thank you.
I have one more question.
I don't see any further questions, but you can continue.
And there is one more change that I've mentioned. Due September 21st is the Ombudsman report. We will be doing that this evening. Associate Director Bogue will do it this evening. And I think that's it around update for board reports. But thanks for those. And okay.
All right. Is there any other questions or comments on the director's report tonight? Seeing none, then we will move right on to the Ombudsman annual report. That was a good segue. Associate Director Bogue. Oh, yes. Trustee Oliver.
Thank you, through Chair, and I'm sorry I missed this, so I'm a bit late coming in. Looking at the report schedule and our order paper motion number M160111, sorry, 012, around annual report added to the report schedule. This is to do with the enrollment, the new option for French immersion. It states here starting 2018. I'm guessing that's the school year, 2018-19? Or early in the calendar
Are
year.
you talking about the order
2018?
paper or the?
Well, it has to do with the report schedule, but as relating to order paper motion number M160112.
Through Chair Amos to Trustee Oliver. Yeah, that would start as the grade 2 100% French immersion takes place. So it starts in September 2018. There will be a report in February around core French that Associate Director Bogue and I think Superintendent Salmini would bring. And they may have comments at this time. But the intent of this is to provide trustees with data regarding the implementation of the Program Viability Committee recommendations around starting grade 2 French immersion. So that's the intent of that. Now I look at it, we could actually give an interim report in March or February of 2018 because the registrations for FI are in at that time. Now, those can change, but, given that, I think we could add that to the list, and so trustees have an idea before September 2018, given that those numbers can change, but they would give us a very good indication. So, Associate Director Bogue, could you add that so we could do that?
Thank you. Okay, so now we will move on to the Ombudsman annual report, report 16119 on page 36 of your board package. Welcome, Associate Director Bogue.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Through you two trustees, this is the first annual Ombudsman report. We made a commitment to bring back each year annually a report with activity with the Ombudsman's office. I want to start by just apologizing for the vagueness of the report, but we were thinking about some of the sensitive issues that may land at the Ombudsman's office, and certainly want to ensure privacy of staff, students, families, and also the anonymity of the complainant as well. So we didn't want to provide too much information so that anonymity is in jeopardy. Two matters came to our attention last year. In both cases, the Ombudsman contacted the board, senior staff, answered questions, provided clarification, provided information around our own policies and practices and procedures. And in each case, the Ombudsman took that information away and got back to us later on in the spring of last year or the summer, saying that the matter, there's no additional follow-up or action. One of the things that one wonders is, was the issue resolved satisfactorily? What was the feedback back to the complainant? And we don't have that information. The Ombudsman takes that information back. What they do with that in terms of getting back to the complainant is information that they don't share with us. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have if I can, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions on the Ombudsman report tonight? Seeing none. The director has a comment.
Yeah, I would just like to make a comment. If we have an Ombudsman report that involves policy, trustees would be involved in that. So.
Thank you. Well, she slipped in under the wire. Trustee L. Harrison.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is just, is there, through the Ombudsman's office, will they be doing an annual report that lists the number of complaints per public agency and the resolutions kind of thing? I guess they've done them in the past. Adding school boards is what's the new thing. So I just wonder whether we have a heads up on what the reporting around that will look like.
Through Chair Amos to Trustee L. Harrison, I have not had a heads up, but I have heard that there would be an annual Ombudsman's report, but I've had no correspondence to that effect.
Thank you. Trustee Collard.
At the OPSPA Board of Directors meetings, we are updated on the numbers. I don't know if it's a continuous number that they report on their website, but we have been updated at OPSPA Board of Directors as to the numbers of complaints that are made regarding school boards and all other sectors.
Thank you. Are there any further comments or questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Associate Director Boger. I think it's safe to sit down this time. All right. So we're now up to a capital update, the summer projects. Sounds like a movie. Superintendent Cullen. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We had a very busy summer, and it's not over yet. We're holding on to the last few days here. As you know, probably one of our bigger projects that had to be completed by September was the addition at Halton Village Public School, the 5-room addition that went onto the second floor. That was complete and occupied. We had a number of portables to relocate over the summer due to shifts in enrollment. Those have all been completed based on the first projections that came out. There are a second round, which is not uncommon, but there's a second round of portable moves that will be coming out, I suspect, shortly. We also had to relocate portables on Craig Kielburger to make room for the proposed 10-room addition that's to go on there shortly. So that was all completed over summer to get that schedule underway so that students wouldn't be disrupted when the construction part starts. That's been completed. And we have about I'm going to guess another 500 projects that took place over the course of this summer. It was a very large volume of projects this year. Hopefully trustees have had the opportunity to see some of the schools, but some of them this year we did a number of things at one school. So Maple Grove comes to mind, Gladys Spears comes to mind, Glenview. So there was a number of schools where a significant number of things all took place at one school. And to date, the feedback we've been getting is very good in that when teachers have returned, principals have returned, because of the number of things that took place, they're seeing a fairly significant change in the overall appearance, if you will, and age of the building. Part of the Close the Gap projects, we've started the electrical. You recall there was sort of a two-phased approach to that. So several of the sites that needed electrical upgrades have either begun or completed that portion. A number of the sites have the outdoor units, so the condensing units have all been placed and ready to go. And there was a delay in receiving the interior unit, so the fan coil unit that sits in the classroom. I believe there's about 4 or 5 sites right now that are ready to go other than the actual receipt of those particular pieces, and they'd be up and running. And I'm sure the schools would have loved to have had them in the last day or so. I think at that point I might be best to just take questions. We have a number of projects that are still underway to some degree, but for the most part all spaces have been occupied, which is our primary goal for the start of school. And some of the work will either continue either in the evenings or weekends, depending on the arrangements we've made with the contractors and the schools to complete those. But at this point in time, I would think that all of the schools and all of the spaces have been occupied for the most part.
Sounds like a very busy summer. We do have some comments and questions for you. Trustee Daniele.
Thank you very much. At the end of June, we attended a news conference, and there was an announcement by the Halton MPP that they were releasing another $19 million. And the comment made at that point was that the funds would flow immediately because they wanted them used through the summer. My question is, did the funds flow immediately, and if so, how were they used?
Through the chair to Trustee Daniele, I think I'll let Superintendent Veerman comment on the flow of the actual monies and how that actually happens. But yes, it was available certainly for our use, and the ministry had contacted us ahead of time to see, could we use that? And of course, we said yes. What we actually have done to, I think, use as much of that as we can, our proposed plan, if you will. We had all of our board initiative Close the Gap projects that had been designed, tendered, and scheduled for the summer time frame. Those will, for the most part, now become funded by those funds because they would have been in addition to previously approved and funded ministry projects. So it meets their criteria around, yes, it's additional work and related to those elements of the building. So that's how we're going to take a big piece of that. Parts of it may or may not be eligible for that, and that's fine because that money is actually to be spent or can be spent over 2 years. So we're to do as much as we can in year 1, and I will hope by the next board meeting we'll have a full report to show you precisely where the dollars went. But that's the intent at this point. And of course, next year we can spend the balance of it. So whatever was left from the, I think it's a $9 million in 1 year and 10 in the other. It's not necessarily an equal split. But that's our intent would be then to spend the balance of that next summer. So as busy as this summer was, I suspect next summer is going to be even busier project-wise. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Gerbentz.
Through you, Chair Amos. Superintendent Cullen, I know that there have been a lot of projects being done in my schools, and some of them were so hoping that the air conditioning would be running. That was my biggest comment from parents this summer is, when is the air conditioning? When is the air conditioning coming in? So I was wondering if you could send out to trustees sort of a tentative completion date for some of those projects, just because I'm still going to get parents calling me and I'd like to give them at least a ballpark time frame.
Certainly, that's our goal, is to have a full report on the status of all the projects, and that would have a precise timetable for each of those sites. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Gray.
My question's been answered. Thank you.
I like that, succinct. Trustee Harvey Hope.
I just wanted to say thank you for EJ and Maple Grove. Maple Grove's been tweeting pictures all summer, so I haven't been to the school yet, but I have been seeing what's happening on Twitter. I visited EJ, and that primary wing is beautiful and clean and doesn't look its age, and has these motion-activated lights when you walk in. So if anybody tries to break in, the whole place is going to go up like a light. But the best thing is the electrical has been fixed, so the old horror stories of grade 1s having circuit breakers in their classrooms is gone. So that's wonderful. And the grass looks great too. So thank you very much for investing in Ward 3.
Thank you. Vice Chair Graves.
Thank you. This is in part a question on the summer updates, and perhaps for the report, I know that it is coming on the 21st, but I'm glad to hear the portables at Craig Kilberger were moved successful in anticipation of the pending construction. I was just wondering, is the project on schedule as per the timelines? I think in the last report we had, it was starting tentatively September 2016 for completion in August of 2017. Is that still on track?
Correct. Thank you for that question. I think at this point, we're probably about 3 to 4 weeks behind on the tender, the cycle for that. So we'd originally planned to get that out in August. It looks like it'll be going out shortly. So it'll still give us time to get in the ground before the frost hits and keep us on track for that 10-room addition. So I wouldn't, the specific dates have moved, but our overall timeline at this point is not at risk.
Thank you. Trustee L. Harrison.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. My question is with respect to the air conditioning and related upgrades at TA Blakelock and the anticipated timing of the start. It's my understanding that that largish project perhaps will be undertaken throughout the school year. And I just wondered, in cases like that, how is that done to maintain a healthy and happy teaching environment? Do the contractors work on weekends or over holidays, or how does that work? Thanks.
Thank you for that. Through the chair to Trustee L. Harrison. The issue at Blakelock was we had great expectations of what we might be able to accomplish, and it was really revolving around the electrical. So we were debating whether it was on the border between whether it did need or could use the electrical upgrade. It was distributed through the school. So when the engineering review took place, the conclusion was it was far more complicated than it needed to be, and therefore changed the timeline. So it's actually one of about 4 or 5 projects that we've now extended the timeline on the close the gap air conditioning. So it will be done throughout the course of the year. Typically what we would do is make arrangements with the school and the staff around whether or not they can move from one space to another. Like, can we actually cycle through areas and have access to a space at some period of time? If we can't, then we would go to the evenings and weekends option. We try not to do that as our first place, because typically what happens is a contractor will leave something laying out and students come in the next morning. So there's a lot more diligence required when you do that model than if a space can be turned over to the contractor. Many of the spaces that we're talking about aren't accessible to students. So that's a good thing if we're dealing with mechanical rooms and spaces that students shouldn't be using or aware of. And then what we just have to watch for there is that we don't disrupt things like the power or internet access, those servicing type things, water and washrooms. So it's really unique to each school and its population and how it uses its building. So that's all part of I will say, a negotiated, if you will, approach to the project. Most schools are more than willing to do whatever it takes to get whatever it is at the end of the day, particularly if it's air conditioning. They'll do lots of those kinds of things to get it done. To be fair to them, they may not understand what the consequences are. So they say, yes, we can give up the room. Well, we didn't realize that giving up the room meant, it's completely encapsulated or enclosed or locked off, or, we thought we could get in and out. So we try and make them as aware as we can of how that process will be. And in many cases, it'll come down to the contractor. So that's one of the things we would look for in the selection of contractors as to how they conduct themselves in an occupied school. And we have had occasions where we've had to do that in the past.
Thank you. Trustee Gavranz.
Thank you, Chair Amos, through you. I've also had conversations with people with regards to portables, an increase in portables at Dr. Frank J. Hayden. And so I was thinking, what is some of the portables are okay-ish looking, and some of them are not so nice. And I was just wondering, what is the process with regards to choosing portables? Like, do they go by list of age or by how beat up they are, and do they age out at some point out of our system?
Thank you for that. That's a whole bunch of questions all wrapped into one. The process is for selection of which ones go where is usually more about what's available. So when we work with planning around them listing which schools are in a circumstance where they can give up the portables and where they're located. So moving them from one end of Halton to the other doesn't make sense if we can find one that's in Burlington and do that type of thing. In some cases, it can do with the configuration. Most of our portables, when I say ours, I mean the ones that are owned, built for the Halton board, have windows and doors only on one side so that they can be clustered, so they can sit back to back, side to side without too much thought as to which one goes where. Recently, though, we've started to use a lot of leased portables, and they're coming from other boards. Other boards have different specifications. They can have windows that are different size, different shape, door configurations. So they either come in reconfigured to suit ours, or when they're on site, we reconfigure them. So that will depend on where they've come from in that regard. As far as age and condition, we've got some pretty old portables in the system, but then we refurbish them. I mean, for the most part, it's the siding and the windows and the doors. It's things that would be deemed to be typical life cycle replacement in the course of a wood frame building, if you will. Hayden was somehow very successful the first time they got their portables at having them all conveniently color coordinated, and I won't go into the details on that. I'm not sure that every school gets that luxury, but they were probably older and old enough to warrant, recladding, residing, those types of things. We've done some schools portable by portable as opposed to doing the whole group of them. So it really depends on the condition and the assessment they come in. In some cases, it's the building department. The building department is part of their inspection or our preventative maintenance on the mold inspections and moisture. Those contractors or inspectors will come in and say, look, this one's got, perforations here, here, here. You may want to patch them, but overall you might just want to replace the whole facade at that point. So it's really not a set response other than by the time we're done with them, hopefully, each one of them has all of the Halton standard things in it and on it. So it has the doors and the stairs and the coat racks and the storage for the teacher and all those kinds of things. Air conditioning, as you know, we facilitate them or equip with them air conditioning as they get moved. So they become fairly uniform in that way, but they may not all be exactly the same color and configuration as the ones that are on site.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions for Superintendent Cullen tonight? Seeing none, thank you very much for your report. So we have now been sitting and discussing for just over an hour. And one of the things that a number of us have talked about in the past is the fact that it's awful hard to focus and concentrate for a period of time. I've done a lot of reading, and it says it's good to stand up and do a 2-minute break. So we're going to have just a 2-minute break. It's not a bio break. It's just a 2-minute break to stand up and do some stretching. One of the things we're looking at is maybe getting some great news of the board to use as fillers, like while this is happening. But right now, we're going to use the agenda, and people can see that while this is going on. But make sure your microphones are off. So this is only for 2 minutes. Just stand up and stretch or walk around, and then we're going to start again. Welcome back. Hopefully that was a quick break and refreshing. So now we're up to our committee reports. Are there any committee reports tonight? Trustee Harvey Hope.
It's not a report, it's just a heads up. September 20th, we have an audit committee meeting, and we will be having a portion of it open to the public, and the rest of it will be closed.
That's great. Trustee Daniele.
Thank you. Just a reminder that now we're kicking it into gear in September, that next month will be the PIC conference. So you'll start to see a lot coming out for that, and hopefully you can talk it up at your schools and help volunteer and just generally help make it a success. Thank you.
And that's Saturday, October the 15th. Thank you. Trustee Gerbens.
And on the PIC meeting, there is one tomorrow night, here, 6:45.
Thank you. Trustee Pappen.
Just to let you know, the next accessibility coordinating meeting is on September 15th, 9 to 11 a.m. in the Burlington room.
Thank you. Vice Chair Graves.
The next committee of the whole meeting is on Wednesday, September 14th, and we'll be doing some goal setting and priority setting for the coming year. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other reports for the committees tonight? Seeing none, we will, oh, Trustee Gerbens. Go ahead.
Correction, it's actually next Thursday, the PIC meeting.
Thank you. Okay. So we're now up to the director's report. Director Miller.
Thank you, Chair Amos. I don't have much of a report tonight. I just want to welcome back all our students to their schools. First day's over, get to work. And I want to welcome back all our staff to the schools. And I want to thank all our staff that allowed our schools to be open and running, those that worked through the summer on the corporate side, from facilities to business services to human resources. I want to thank them for their work during the summer that allows our students to return to school. And I want to thank and welcome all the trustees back to the board table. Thanks. That's it.
Thank you. Is there any comments or questions for the director on his report tonight? Seeing none. Communications from the chair. Oh, just a minute. Trustee Gray has a comment or question for the director.
Yes, thank
Go
you
ahead.
very much. I just wanted to make a comment on all the very positive feedback I heard about what happened in our schools on the 6th of September. I believe that it was a very productive day. Teachers were fully engaged in excellent programming and professional development. And I think what I was hearing from the parents too were that they liked the idea of not having another start-stop within the school year. They felt that that was nicely accommodated. And so I would just like to have that as public record, that what I was hearing was very, very positive about our start up on the 7th of September.
Thank you for that, Trustee Gray, and I want to thank the Calendar Committee, who were the ones who recommended that and brought it to the Board of Trustees for approval. And so thank you for doing that, because I too heard lots of positive feedback as well.
That's great. Thank you. So we're up to the communications from the chair. I really have nothing else other than if you haven't had a chance to check out the new website, please do, because it really looks amazing. And that's it. So now we are up to trustees' questions and comments. Are there any trustees' questions and comments tonight? Trustee Collard.
Thank you. This summer, the MP for Burlington held a conversation on immigration, to which Director Miller was invited, and unfortunately he could not attend, so he requested that a Burlington trustee attend, and I was able to attend. It was a very well attended and very well thought out meeting. We discussed several immigration issues, and I tried to bring the perspective of public education and our need for our students to be able to identify with themselves in the classroom, and how important it is for students that are immigrating to our country from other countries to be able to acclimatize and to recognize themselves in the classroom, as well as providing English language learning services through Halton Multicultural Council and other ways of providing that. Halton Multicultural Council was also present at the meeting, and they were very happy to hear the support of the Halton District School Board. The census information that will be gathered this year, now that the full long census form has been returned to its former status will be very helpful in terms of planning, and we congratulated the MP on having that brought back. So it was a very informative session, and there will be a follow-up, and I was delighted to be a part of it. Thank you for allowing me to do that.
Director Miller.
Actually, through you, Chair Amos, to Trustee Collard, it's me that has to thank you. I thought it was very important that we have representation as a board at that meeting. I was unable to make it, so I appreciate the fact that you went, and you'll see the significance of attending that meeting around immigration for the Halton District School Board when Superintendent Etoff brings his report around the Welcome Center sometime in October, and we will see the many new Canadians that have joined this board. So I think it was really significant, important, not just for symbolic purposes, but also for them to hear the voice of the HDSB, because we're getting many, many new Canadians. So thank you for doing that, Trustee Collard.
Thank you. Trustee Harvey Hope.
A couple things. One, just wanted to highlight that even after your alumni of the Halton District School Board schools, there are opportunities to get together with your colleagues, because Oakville Trafalgar High School and T.A. Blakelock had a picnic today at the Coronation Park. It was advertised in the Beaver, and so it's a bunch of graduates from 1945 to 1965, I think it was. There's a group of them. It's nothing to do with us. They get together. They've been doing it for a while. But I want to thank the publicity people for getting over there today on a very busy day and getting some acknowledgement of that. So thank you for that. To the Red Devils Oakville Trafalgar Robotics Club was actually at the CNE at the Innovation Garage this summer. I didn't have a chance to get down there due to other circumstances, but they got some high-profile visibility, and I'll be interested to see how that plays out. And so the fact that they get students to come out and go down and spend full days down there is fantastic. And my query is, usually on the first day of school, we often get an update on how many students we now have on the board. And I was curious, because we heard rumors that we'd had a whole flurry of new students arrive. If we have a new number, and if we don't have it today, if maybe we could get some information, because we're inching up to a number that we really want to get a little bit bigger, and we'd like to know when we hit that target. So thanks.
Thank you. Executive Officer McFadden.
Thanks. I bring an annual report to the board around September reorganization and the first meeting in October, and it will include that information, because those things are still happening as we speak, and once that all evens out, a report will come forward to the board.
Thank you. Trustee Oliver.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I believe all of us trustees have received an email from a coalition or a group of individuals called Dads Against Dirty Air. And their email had to do with concerns around school buses and other vehicles idling on school property. So it is my understanding that every town and municipality or city may have their own bylaws or policies around that. And I think a lot of our schools have signage, but I'm curious to know how well those policies are adhered to and what is happening at the individual schools. How well is the anti-idling policy communicated to parents and bus drivers and the after-school care providers that arrive with minivans or buses to pick up for various programs. So as a kind of a query, I stood outside my home school today and I watched what happened. And certainly the school buses that were parked in their zone were turned off, but it was an after-school provider that pulled up in a small bus that was idling. And part of it had to do with the flow of traffic. They're sitting there waiting for a parent to move out of a bus zone until they can pull up. So it's these little intricacies that play into just when vehicles are turned off and how much idling happens and exhaust. But as we all know, the exhaust is not a healthy or safe thing for our students and the school environment. And so this may be something that the Transportation Committee looks at, or maybe there's a different venue for this, but I'd be curious to know what's happening and what we can do about that.
Thank you. Director Miller.
Through you, Chair Amos, to Trustee Oliver. We actually had an email from Trustee Grabentz about the same thing earlier on, and I contacted our transportation manager, Karen Lacroix, but that I will ask her to take a look at this, but not at the moment because they're in the morass of cleaning, sorting out all the buses and all that stuff. So I had suggested to her middle to end of October if we could have a look at this around our school bus providers. I would bet, and I'm looking at the superintendents around the room here, that virtually every one of our schools has a no idle sign somewhere, or no idle, and principals make announcements and stuff goes home in the newsletters. But you're right, there's still tons of idling. There are challenges with it. When I was a principal in a high school, we sent out kids to peacefully confront people about idling. Sometimes it wasn't quite as peaceful as we'd hoped, and it then required intervention from the principal, and occasionally the police turned up. But there is an education factor that we still need to do, and I think your point about information, if we have the information, the education is better. So Karen was positive, but I want her to get through all the stuff that she has to deal with at the moment, because it's crazy right now in terms of making sure that the buses are all on time. And maybe Associate Director Bowe can bring it to school ops, and we can do a more thorough kind of look at that. It's an excellent point, because the air is terrible around some of our schools at some times during the day.
Thank you. Trustee Grabentz.
Thank you, Chair Amos. In light of the extremely warm weather that we experienced before the summer holiday and today, and in light of the fact that we recognize the importance of maintaining a consistent reaction to extremely cold weather across the board, I'd like to propose that we form a subcommittee to create a hot weather policy.
I believe there may be a policy already in existence. Executive Officer McFadden.
Our Health and Safety Department does have guidelines around extreme heat, and they were sent out again today to the system. The Occupational Health and Safety Act doesn't have high temperature regulations or guidelines, only the opposite. In cold weather, it is a health and safety concern. So we do give out best practices and guidelines for activities in the heat, and that did go out today, and be happy to share those with trustees if that is appropriate.
Thank you. Director Miller, did you?
No.
Okay. Trustee Reynolds.
Thank you. I just wanted to give a shout out to all the school councils who applied to the province for the pro grants. I don't know if anybody had a chance to go through all the pro grants were just announced this week, and there was over 75 schools in Halton that successfully received them. So kudos to all them, all the parent councils who worked together, school councils worked together to raise funds to help parents get more involved in the school. So I was really happy to see that. Having been a school council chair before, that was one of our biggest issues.
Thank you. And also happy to recognize that the PIC conference received a grant as well. Trustee Pappen.
Thank you. In August, I attended a consultation that Corinna Gould, MP for Burlington, held on climate control. There were many members from the sustainable development groups in Burlington, and many great ideas shared. especially around emissions and car idling, which may be very useful to the board and our transportation department. I also found out from a person idling their car in front of my house that in the city of Burlington, you're actually allowed to idle for 15 minutes, which, so, you know, there's a lot of disagreement on what the rules actually are. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Harvey Hope.
And I actually know the rules for Oakville, but I also know that in a day like today, most of them go out the window because when it goes over a certain temperature, you're allowed to idle to keep your air conditioning running. Anyway, my comment has left me again. I'll think of it again.
Thank you. Trustee Daniele.
Thank you. I'm wondering if Director Miller or anyone else might know, just I'm starting to get a lot of questions about it. Do you know anything about a school bus with Kilbride students on it that were rear-ended by a car this morning? Someone's grandchild was on the bus, and we normally we get something almost immediately, and we haven't heard anything. I don't know which SO is responsible for Kilbride, but does anybody happen to know anything?
Through you, Chair Amos, Trustee Daniele, I heard, I didn't hear. Lucy?
Yes, through the chair, Sandy Morgan did send out an email. There was a bus that was rear-ended. There were no injuries, and the students were safely brought to the school. Okay, it could be just with the start of school. They're quite busy trying to get all the students. That's what was reported.
Thank you. Did you want to add anything, Superintendent Blackwell? Is that the same information?
It is the same information, and it was shared with Marnie Denton, who decided the communication process there were no injuries, so there was no need to further the communication, and the school dealt with it internally.
Thank you. Are there any other trustee comments or questions tonight? Seeing none, we need a motion to rise to private. Moved by Trustee Gray, seconded by Trustee Gerbentz. Just a minute. We don't have a...
Hold on 2 seconds.
It's okay. It's okay. All those in favor? And that passes unanimously. Thank you very much, and we will reconvene in about 2 or 3 minutes. And thank you very much, gentlemen.
Yeah, and all the SOs may leave except Stop Padre Barrick. We need someone to run the